I'm Luke Story. For the past 22 years, I've been relentlessly committed to my deepest passion, designing the ultimate lifestyle based on the most powerful principles of spirituality, health, psychology, and personal development. The Lifestylist Podcast is a show dedicated to sharing my discoveries and the experts behind them with you. Good to see you, Dan.
You too.
Yeah, man. So I'm glad we got to do this one in person.
Yeah, both Austinites.
Live in the flesh. Yeah, our last one was a couple years ago. I want to say maybe even 3 years ago or something.
2017, yeah.
And we did it on Skype, which is never my preference. So I'm glad to see you here. And I'm so glad you live in Austin. We have so many mutual friends in the community here. And
yeah.
I was stoked to be able to connect.
Yeah, I was surprised when you reached out and you were here in Austin. I was just like, oh, wow. Everybody's in Austin now.
We kind of are.
Yeah.
We kind of are. I always tell people that come here from places like California, let's not vote this place into another California.
Please don't. Yes.
Yeah, I voted the other day, and I think I did pretty good. I did a little research, and I think I made some good choices. I don't know if it mattered, but...
yeah, you made a choice.
One proposition that I did not get to vote for that I wanted to passed in my favor, and so I guess they did it without me. So I guess let's start at the beginning. What led you into optimization medicine? I know you've been through, a few iterations through the functional medicine movement and some other things.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a bit of a truncated journey that led you to the cutting edge stuff you're into now.
Quick story is, got into medical school, didn't really resonate with the disease model and pharmacology of things, and really thought medicine should be something about enhancing human state, enhancing well-being in general, and also work with disease model, but not disease model solely, and that's what it's turned out to be. And so with that disenchantment, I'm looking at it, I'm like, what am I going to do? This isn't what I really signed up for. But I did find surgery, which I enjoyed. I loved working with my hands, and I'm kind of ambidextrous, so working in surgery, especially laparoscopic surgery, was great. I had a great time with it, and started doing weight loss surgery because I could take people from a baseline of quality of life and bring them up, which everything else in medicine is a stepwise postponement of death, essentially. And did that for several years, but then discovered something called age management medicine, and that introduced me to a world that I had longed for but hadn't known, where you could actually work with healthy people and help them to have more well-being in their life. And that was where it all started, and that was in 2005. By 2009, I decided I didn't want to do surgery anymore, so walked away from that and focused solely on growing this aspect of what we were doing, because it was kind of a hobby at first. But it just changes all the time, all the new stuff coming. And I mean, I was given a talk for Paleo FX, and I'd spoken there in, I think it was 2014, and I talked about age rejuvenation and all these technologies that were coming. And I gave the talk again this year, and it was like, okay, these are the technologies we're now using in our clients. And it was like that premonition based on the theories back then that all kind of came into fruition in the course of 5-6 years.
Yeah, we're really living in a very cool time.
Yeah. With
renegades like you out there leading the charge. Seriously, because I remember even years ago when I discovered that there was this other branch of medicine they call functional medicine, or working with naturopaths, etc. And that's benefited me a lot, because you can go get labs, and then you can essentially, you're replacing pharmaceuticals with supplementation typically. But still within that, I find it a little bit lacking, because you're still averaging yourself against the average person.
Right.
And the life that I lead does not, settle for just being average. So what is optimal then, is not optimal, is kind of an individual thing, right?
Right.
So you can look at a set of labs and, well, this is kind of where the average person is, and maybe this is optimal for those people, but what's optimal for you?
Right.
As an individual biological organism. So I think what we're doing right now is getting closer to that.
But I went down the road of functional medicine thinking that was the way to go for me, because it was, in theory, it sounded great, but I found a lot of functional medicine was still focused on the disease, and they just treated it differently. They treated it with more natural products, actually some more lifestyle stuff, which I like. But, it was still a focus on that. It wasn't a focus on optimization. They're all big on the root cause and understanding systems. The human system is not a reductionistic system, so there's never a root cause. And when you look at it, you have to say, okay, what kind of system is it? It's a complex system. And to analyze a complex system, it's more of recognizing patterns and seeing what happens as instead of cause and effect, you're looking at patterns and evolution with it. What does it end up causing in that regard, but not a direct cause and effect. Just all these things contributing to give one outcome. This is, it's a perfect segue into the brain, because it's how the brain works, where everybody's looking for the one thing that's going to give them that limitless pill, and it doesn't exist. You're not going to have the one thing that's going to get everybody there. People will come to me and they're like looking for cognitive enhancement, and we have all kinds of tools for it. But then they don't want to make the effort to get good sleep. They don't want to have good nutrition. They don't make an effort to have these. And without that foundation and those contributing to the outcome, not any of the enhancements are going to make much of a difference for them.
I've heard you talk about when people come to your clinic and they have some pathology of some sort, that you won't even allow them to continue to contextualize it in a way.
Right.
I have diabetes, I have whatever.
Mm-hmm.
What's your position on that? Could you explain that a bit more into the systems approach?
Yeah, we get stuck on titles when we're going through life, and we assume the role of that title. When you're a son or a father or a brother or a doctor, you kind of embody what that role means to you. And when people are given diagnoses, that's a label that they get. So when they say you have diabetes, and the truth of the matter is diabetes isn't actually a disease the way we actually think of a disease. I mean, it's a spectrum of insulin resistance that's gotten to the point where it requires medication. So to get them off of the idea that they have a disease, then we just say, you've got pretty severe insulin resistance due to lifestyle factors, and here's how we're going to go about correcting that. And we give them that path, and the fact that they're no longer thinking that they're diabetic, they actually resolve it. If they continue to hold on to those descriptors and titles, then I know I'm going to have a lot of difficulty getting them to the finish line on that.
I see that a lot with people that have something serious going on, where they become sort of psychologically identified
Right.
with that label. Like it's not even like I have autoimmune or I have Lyme or lupus or whatever. It's like they could almost say like that's what I am.
Right.
Right? So on that subconscious level, I'm assuming it's much harder to get someone past that when that's, they've suffered so much under it that it becomes part of their identity, right?
It does, yeah.
So then it's not only you're trying to optimize someone or heal someone, but then there's the psychological element where you have to sort of detach them from their identification as the person who has X, Y, or Z.
Right.
How do you work with people to overcome that psychological part? I mean, did they just kind of go along with your paradigm because they really want to work with you and they want to, be treated in your clinic, or do you meet some resistance where people are like clutching on to that label because that's essentially what they've become?
Yeah. Generally with disease diagnoses, we're pretty good at showing them the science of what's going on. Here's the progression of how you became diabetic, which is just on the spectrum of insulin resistance. type 1 diabetes can be considered a disease because they're missing the beta cells. There's nothing physiologically really missing from type 2 diabetic. It's just that their insulin sensitivity isn't there. So we just tell them, this is a descriptor of what you have, not a title of what you have. So this is what's going on, and this is what we're going to correct. The time we have the biggest problem is in victim mentality. So when people become victims of whatever they have going on, and you know, they'll come in with mold or Lyme, and they just assume this victim role, and they need that for their identity. I saw this in gastric bypass patients that I worked with, where they would lose the weight and they would think that they're going to have this perfect life because the weight was the whole reason that, you know, their husband didn't like them, or their boss didn't like this person, and yet they lose the weight and they find the same thing exists still yet, and they've lost the excuse rather than looking more at, you know, what is it else that is potentially wrong with that person or with me that's causing this. It's got to be the weight. So they'll sabotage themselves and they'll gain the weight back so that they now have that protection again. And that's a hard one to break from people. We used to work with, we had health psychologists on our staff that would work with them. And now in our clinic we have performance psychologists that really work with getting them out of those mind loops. And the victim is hard though, so we typically kind of stay away from taking clients that are in that mindset, because it takes a lot of work, and that's it interferes with our ability to optimize for a long time.
Yeah, I can imagine, because along with that, victim mentality is going to, I'm assuming, come with the blame, right?
Yeah.
And then you have kind of a double-edged sword of resistance, because you have someone who is in their perpetuity of victimhood, but also that needs to be expressed somewhere. So it's like, well, it's Monsanto, or you know, whatever, right? Whatever they could point it to. And there's a lot of perpetrators out there that we could all blame, but it doesn't really get you into the solution mindset. It's like, I think for any of us that have experienced trauma, for example, you know, there's the initial acknowledgement of the trauma, looking into it, facing it, doing shadow work by however one does it.
Mm-hmm.
But within that, there also has to be, in my experience, at least subjectively, a release of the resentment and the blame associated with what led one to be victimized in the first place.
Right.
Right? Because you're still kind of putting your energy on the problem rather than on the infinite potential of solution. So that's a really great distinction. So when it comes to what I want to focus on here, which is mental performance and vocal performance, you know, when we think of brain optimization, what are the different categories by which you define, you know, a properly working brain that's firing on all cylinders and is going to allow someone to really have a better quality of life? What are the metrics that you're kind of looking for there?
Well, first and foremost, there's not a perfect brain. You know, it's just like saying, is there a perfect diet? There's not a perfect diet. There's a perfect diet for you at certain points in your life and certain goals that you have in mind, but the same thing with the brain. You have inputs that you can use, supplements, medications, that can alter neurochemical processes in the brain. That's one of the ways you can enhance that. Another popular way that's really gaining a lot of traction is external stimulation or neurofeedback. We prefer the neurostimulation. We used to use neurofeedback, but we found neurostimulation was quite effective in achieving, and when we look at a brain, one thing I will tell people is when we do a brain map, so we do a brain map on all of our clients, and it's compared to a normative database, and it tells you, you know, okay, these are areas that are outside of the normal range, and these are areas that are outside of the normal range, either above or below. And they look at it and they're like, whoa, that doesn't look good. Well, you're being compared to a normal brain. this is average. And none of the people I work with are average people, so if they would test as a look normal on these things, I'd worry more so than anything else.
Right.
So what we do is we look at it, and we also have them do cognitive testing. So we see what their performance metrics are as well. And then we compare it to the brainwave patterns, and we say, is this pattern supporting what they're working towards, what they're working kind of cognitive function needs and focus. Like an engineer, you want that more analytical aspect, and they're going to be way off of normal on baseline, and it's not something you want to correct. There's a big problem with a lot of the neurofeedback clinics is they base it on these normal brains, and they don't really pay attention to, oh, well, wait a second, this is this person's gift. This is what's actually making them exceptional. But what we look at is, okay, are there areas that you're desiring to have better performance in that we're seeing subpar performance in the brain? And then we say, okay, well, can we stimulate in a new wave pattern into that area? Or they'll have an area that's disruptive to them, like they're not able to pay attention, they're not able to sleep, whatever it is, and we can see if we can correlate that with the brainwave pattern, then we can use neurostimulation to actually program it out of the brain. And we never do things just single modality. So when we do brain stimulation work, we will give them some kind of a baseline cognitive performance like Qualia Mind. We like that because it's a good general foundational brain performance supplement. But then when they come in to do the brain stimulation, we'll give them some oxytocin and then 2 sprays of ketamine typically. And what the ketamine does is it activates this neuroplasticity, this ability to learn these patterns very quickly. And we started using it about 1.5 years ago, and we saw our ability to create new patterns in the brain just go exponential in very short periods of time. And now we can do just typically 10-20-minute sessions of brain stimulation. We can get a whole new pattern established, whereas neurofeedback, it used to take us 40-50 sessions of 40 minutes each where they had to stare at the screen and fly the plane. With this one, what we do is we set up breath pacing with them, and so they're breathing according to the breath pacing while the brain's being stimulated. So we're taking care of a lot of things all at once, and it's all ingraining in them with the different things that we're using.
That is so cool. I've done a lot of neurofeedback over the years, and I enjoy it, and I've definitely seen benefits from it.
Yeah.
Especially, I went and did the Bio-Cybernaut training out in Sedona with Dr. Hart, who I interviewed recently, and we did alpha training. And I cheated a little bit. I admitted this to Dr. Hart when I did the interview, but you weren't supposed to take any supplements or anything like that. I don't think I had Qualia Mind with me at that time, but I was doing like paracetam, and I didn't take modafinil or anything too crazy, but paracetam and some other mild stuff. And I did really well. I was really good at, and I was doing like MCT and stuff like that, getting the ketones in, and I was, for lack of better terminology, I was crushing it. I mean, I was really getting great scores, and I think that it benefited me. But it does take a lot of time. I mean, we were in those chambers for hours and hours and hours, and it was time deprivation, and you couldn't have your cell phone, there's no windows, you have no idea how long each, I think they called them an epoch, you had no idea how long each one was, and you get out of there at 4 a.m. and kind of going like, what just happened, But it definitely did improve my life, But that's really interesting. The neuroplasticity of the ketamine is a new one for me. I've been hearing some murmurs around microdosing different things, and assisting with the neuroplasticity, and that's something that is obviously becoming ubiquitous amongst circles like ours. But the ketamine, that's really interesting because I've experimented with it a bit myself, doing meditations, like doing the Joe Dispenza meditations and things like that, and have found with, I don't know if it's a microdose because I definitely feel it, but not, I don't think, what someone would take recreationally.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know how people do that stuff recreationally, because I don't want to recreate anything on ketamine. Like, I do not want to move, I don't want to open my eyes, I'm just like basically paralyzed, in the best way. But I have found that it does open up this quantum gateway for manifestation, visualization, and I sense that something very unique is happening in my brain, but I don't really know what. So that's interesting that you've combined that kind of opening with brain chemistry and then added in another input so you can actually maximize that time spent. That's very interesting.
Yeah, we did a lot of reading on the ketamine and doing the studies on, and they were using larger doses in the studies that were creating all this synaptic neuroplasticity that was pretty amazing. A lot of the psychedelics do that. Psilocybin is very classic for all of the activations that occurs, the cross-linkings in the brain. And there's going to be, as that comes out, I think you're going to see a lot more of that used in the neuroenhancement fields. But the ketamine fascinated us with that and its ability to do it. So we decided, let's test it out. And the nasal sprays, 2 nasal sprays, most people don't even perceive that they've done anything. There are some people that get pretty trippy on 2 nasal sprays, so we have to test them out to see what their tolerance level is when they come in for the training. But we couldn't believe, so we would map them before doing the 10 trainings, and we did the 10 trainings in a 5-day period, so twice a day for 5 days. And in the course of just 1 week, we were taking brains that had 6 standard deviations away from where we wanted them into either normal air in that one particular area or just barely above a standard deviation. And it just amazed us that we could do that, and then we would follow them up in 3 months and map it again, and it's still persistent.
Really? Wow, that's crazy, because of the neuroplasticity
Yeah.
effect potentiates the longevity of the change.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting. What a trip. Have you ever run a QEEG on someone while they're on ketamine?
Yeah.
What kind of brainwaves do you see? Does it differ from person to person, or is there sort of a uniform effect it'll have typically?
Well, most people are going to respond differently to different things. You see a major uptick in activity. There's a lot of activity going on in the brain. It gets very busy in there when they're on the ketamine. Ketamine has a really interesting phenomenon associated with it. It tends to, so most of our thinking is controlled by top-down processing. So the bottom-up stuff is coming from more subconscious, and as you come up with these magical ideas or something that the more cerebral centers of the brain are going, oh no, that's not possible, that's not real, don't pay attention to that unicorn or whatever. It shuts those off, and so it kind of kicks them to the side so you never actually experience them. Ketamine has this really interesting phenomenon. So the medial prefrontal cortex is one of the areas that has to do with the fear and the stimulation within the amygdala, and it kind of shuts that off. So you remove that piece of it, but the other thing is it also shuts down the lateral prefrontal cortex, and the lateral is what is in control of the top-down processing. And so once that's shut off, all of a sudden the bottom-up stuff starts coming into your field. This is why people, when they go on journey doses with ketamine, they're having all of these magical experiences. Some of them can't really make sense from occurring from the an epiphenomena of the neurons of the brain. There's something else going on because it can't work that way. But it allows you to experience a lot of the subconscious when you're on it. The nasal spray, that low dose, gives you a little bit of a glimpse of that. So I know people that will do the nasal spray for creative sessions and for meditation, and because it really truly takes away that top-down processing, takes away a lot of the emotional fear related to things. and gives you that ability to kind of look from a non-emotional. I know a lot of people talk about the ability that ketamine opens up these vaulted areas in the brain of past trauma. So past experiences where they really had pushed it away so that it wasn't part of their memories. And we see people with ketamine, even with the nasal spray, when we're talking to them and they're doing the brain stimulation, they'll come out and they'll go, I remember this experience when I was a child and it's something that had, when you look back at it, it was something that they were kind of holding and recreating in their life because they weren't aware that it existed. But ketamine opens those vaulted memories really well, and that's why in psychotherapy, using the ketamine, a really good psychotherapist can help people to navigate that and draw out those areas that they have not been aware that they actually experienced.
So because of its dissociative effect, you're able to go into those memories or thoughts that would have been triggering to the amygdala and re-traumatize you, and potentially, with that sense of, I'm just thinking in my own experiences, that sense of detachment. It's almost like the trauma happened to someone else and you just remember it, but you don't remember it to the point where it's going to reactivate the neurochemistry of reliving a trauma. Like if you say you hadn't faced an early childhood trauma ever in your life, it's a big secret, you've never told anyone, you've never really explored that shadow. If you were to just start talking about it with someone, it could have the effect of actually kind of re-traumatizing you and not giving you the ability to heal it or work through it.
Yeah.
Right? I know that's been the huge benefit of plant medicine ceremonies and things like that for me, is I've been able to go into areas, not things that I haven't faced, but just things that I thought, oh, I'm over that. Like I've talked about it in therapy, I've journaled, I've prayed on it. It's not really affecting me anymore, but circumstances in my life demonstrated to the contrary, because I'd have patterns that I was still stuck in, and the only thing I could connect them to were early trauma that I thought I was over. And in those medicine experiences, many times I've been shown, hey, you want to look at this thing? And I'm like, take a deep breath, take the eye mask off for a minute. I mean, this is what I do, and I go, okay, and I kind of get myself ready, and I'm like, okay, let's go. And then God, guides, medicine, whatever, will go in there, and we start looking around and feeling things and all of that, but there's this sort of safety net to where I can really get in there, and it's much more objective than subjective. And I can experience it without actually feeling, well, you might feel the pain, but not the pain in a way that's going to have me walking away feeling like I just got, hit by a train. Yeah, it's like you actually come out of it and you're like, wow, I'm actually lighter. Because I was able to go into those nooks and crannies and poke around and process and untangle some of those things psychologically, and then come out and it's like, that pattern's gone now. It's phenomenal.
I love the way you describe that as being an objective observer. This is very common with the ketamine. So people will see themselves in the scene, and the person that they're seeing in the scene is really emotionally involved in it, and yet they're looking at it and they can sit there and describe what's happening to this child and not be emotional about it, because that amygdala has lessened that charge. It's not there, but they do feel the emotion of the child. So they have empathy for the child that's there. And I think that's what helps them to resolve it. A lot of them will say, after really kind of viewing this, it didn't happen exactly the way I thought it did.
Right.
But that's the nice thing about ketamine, is that it can give you that objective perspective without the emotional charge that taints kind of what you actually perceived was happening. And it allows you to kind of work through it. And then once you get to the point where you can look at that, I mean, this happens a lot with PTSD, is people get in that loop where they can't go there because the emotional charge is so great. But you get them with the ketamine and they can start talking about what actually happened. You can walk them through the events that initiated their PTSD, and they can describe them. Whereas, without any medication, and the same thing happens with MDMA therapy. with people because of that heart opening that they have and that safety that they feel. They can walk through the trauma again. Yet this time, they're not in the trauma. They're observing the trauma. And once they do that, they suddenly realize, this is a memory. This isn't still going on. This is a memory, and I can file it into my memory. And suddenly, it's like they've resolved this. I mean, the results they're getting with the MDMA trials, pretty outstanding for PTSD. There was I think some of the early results were published just this week that were pretty outstanding.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that. I've not done MDMA therapy, but I have done it in conjunction with the psilocybin ceremony on 2 occasions, and wow. I mean, like, the stuff that I was able to work through that was super scary, you know, like I said, to the point where the inquiry would kind of come in, hey, do you want to look at this? And I'm like, that's my edge.
Yeah.
And I think the MDMA, well, in one case MDMA, the other time it was sassafras, MDA. But in both cases, because of that heart opening and that softening and that sense of safety, when the kind of drama of the psilocybin thread came in, I think that's what really enabled me to kind of have the courage or to be able to let go into the experience and still felt held and not like, I'm going to hit up against something that's going to hurt me worse from looking at it. There's this, I don't know, a softening that takes place, and I guess that's why a lot of people that facilitate now use heart openers, right, as a kind of an entry point, and you start to feel into that, and then when you're ready to go full quantum blast off with whatever the medicine happens to be. In my case, it was psilocybin on those 2 occasions. I don't know, there's just this, there's a sense of safety in that, where you're able to more observe, participate in the threads that you go through, but also there's a non-attachment element to it that's really powerful.
Right.
And also, you know, like you've indicated, it's not just looking at something that, you know, is uncomfortable normally to face, but it actually gets unraveled. You know, there's something that happens where those synapses break loose. So, you know, I don't know what's happening clinically, but that's what I sense in my own experience has happened. And one time in an ayahuasca ceremony, I went, this is going to sound crazy to a lot of people, but this is just what happened, and the results have proven to be something happened that was positive, but I went back into some memories that were triggering me into these patterns, and my conscious awareness traveled physically into my brain, and was in there, you know, disconnecting things from the hippocampus, you know, this memory, and then I could see the thread where that was connecting to my limbic system, to the limbic brain. And so when I would encounter something in today's life that reminded me of that past thing subconsciously, then it would elicit that same response.
Yeah.
And the dump of adrenaline and cortisol and all this stuff, and that's that fight or flight thing we call being triggered. And I went into there and just started toying around doing this psychic surgery on myself, and I thought, this one's related to that, this thread goes to that, this one goes to that, and I went in and just spent hours kind of working with that neuroplasticity, and those triggers for the most part were gone after that.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
And the brain loves that. I mean, the brain loves patterns and pattern recognition. I mean, the connectome of the brain, I mean, there's more connections than there are stars in the entire galaxy. But it's so extensive, and it's so plastic, and throughout life it's plastic. It can change. We saw one of the classic examples is the London cab drivers, who are really super great at knowing the street patterns and all. They're brilliant at it. But what they found is that their memory in other areas actually was reduced. But after they retired, that pattern memory reduced and the other memories came up. The brain tends to allocate resources. So if you're using something pretty aggressively, and they found this too with the sniper training for DARPA, where they were using brain stimulation techniques to accelerate the learning curve for the snipers. And they're the learning curve was off the chart. I mean, it was just compared to the controls, they learned very quickly. But what happened is when it came to putting it into practice, they lost automaticity. So they had taken resources from one area, and what happens is all of these little dendrites and little connections that are occurring throughout the brain start getting heavy in the areas that are being used and directed. In the areas that are not, the resources are pulled from there. And so you see a pulling back of some of these little dendrites. And it's fascinating because, you know, people want to enhance areas of the brain, but you have to understand there's going to be a price you pay for that. And a lot of times we don't know what that is. And that's why I like doing things in combination. So like doing the brain training, you know, having a good kind of foundational nootropic to give support to the brain in all of this, because the brain's going to be burning through a ton of resources, and you've got to have all of those precursors ready to go. So using a nootropic supplement to kind of give you that, and using the ketamine to boost the brain's ability to do it, and then you do the stimulation. So that's why I say there's never a single thing that's going to make a difference for people. It's usually combinations.
Yeah. For those that are listening and don't know what a nootropic is, could you define that?
Nootropic is essentially anything that can, well, in a sense, it's anything that can alter brain function in some way through neurochemical means. And what we typically talk of nootropics when it comes to supplements, one of the classic ones that we all do, a lot of us do, is caffeine. Caffeine is a nootropic.
Right.
Things people wouldn't even consider nootropics, like creatine, which we take the bodybuilders. It's always in the protein shakes, but it's a great nootropic in and of itself.
Or caffeine. I mean, not caffeine. Nicotine.
Nicotine.
Right.
Great nootropic. A little bit of nicotine boosts brain activity. That's why a lot of people they're kind of microdosing with the gum or the lozenges.
I am right now. Give a shout out to my friends over at Lucy. These little 4 milligram pouches. Wow, they are strong. No, these are 8 milligrams. That's
Holy cow, that's a big dose.
Yeah. Their gum is 4, and they're like, "How do you like the gum?" I said, "That's good. I go through them pretty quick." And they're like, "Try this." But I have one in right now.
I use the 1 milligram.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm sure that's enough. I think honestly, I've become a little addicted to them. I'm going to admit, because I find myself going like, "Did I leave it in my car?" Where it's those signs of addiction. Like you're thinking about it more.
I left mine in my car, so
you're thinking about it more than a normal person would, you know, kind of thing. But anyway, so nootropics. So we got this. I happen to have one of these in the kitchen. This Qualia.
the caffeine-free one.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and this stuff, and you know, I always feel weird talking about products on my show, but I'm just being honest. This stuff is freaking amazing.
Yeah.
And I've been taking it for, I don't know, ever since it came out. It's been a few years now. Now, I'm currently using the decaf version of it, because I found when I would take the version of Qualia that had caffeine, and I kind of forget that I took
Is that
a
the
bunch of
original
them.
formula?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'd have a coffee, and then I would just be like, just over-caffeinated. And I don't know if I metabolize caffeine slowly or quickly. I think relatively quickly, because it doesn't seem to last. I can have a coffee midday, and it doesn't interrupt my sleep scores. But I definitely feel it a lot more than I think your average person. So now I just strictly use the decaf Qualia.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing because it doesn't seem to have any, you know, counter indications with anything else that I do, because I might do, you know, some of the racetams, or like on a really bad day I might do a modafinil or a microdose this or that,
Mm-hmm.
and it just seems to be foundational. So with this particular nootropic, it seems to me, based on the ingredient deck and some of the things I can't pronounce and don't know what they are, but it seems to be more kind of in the precursor category, like a brain food, rather than something exogenous that is going to actually directly make your brain do this or that. Do I have that roughly right?
You've got part of it, yeah. This is actually what drew me to the company. I'd been using nootropics for years. I even had a nootropic course online and talked about all the different racetams and modafinils and all of the things that could be used as ingredients. And generally with with cognitive enhancement, I was getting about a 50-50 response from clients on it. So some of them would absolutely love it, say it was the best thing in the world, and others that didn't do anything or made things worse. And I suddenly, I guess it was like released in October. And then within 3 months, I had like 4 of my clients come in and said, oh my God, I started taking this Qualia, and I can't believe how good it makes me feel, and how productive I am with it, and how clear I am with it. And it's like, I haven't even heard of this stuff. So I looked it up, and I was already into systems at that point. And I'm reading about this product, and I'm like, this is a systems-based approach to a supplement. It's the first time I'd ever seen that. And what they had done is they had looked at the way the brain works. They said, okay, what's required from a precursor standpoint? What's required to deliver those precursors, like increasing the blood flow to the brain? What do we have to do to mitigate things that are going to be side effects in the brain? And predominantly, if we increase brain activity, we're going to increase free radical production, so we're going to increase inflammation in the brain, we're going to increase breakdown products that have to be cleared. And so they took an approach of looking at how they could address each of these areas simultaneously. And that the original Qualia product, I missed that one because it had Upep in it, but this one still does all of that stuff and works in conjunction with all kinds of different things. But it's this foundation that you can build off of, or you can use it by itself, because tons of people will take it. And the nice thing is you can adjust how many capsules you take for the response that you get, because I find that at low dose I don't pay attention to anything, but I know it's giving me the foundation. At higher doses, it actually gives me that cognitive enhancement that I'm looking for. So I'll go some days on the higher doses, most days on the low.
How many capsules would a high dose be for you?
Usually 6 to 8.
Yeah, yeah. I find I do about 4.
Yeah.
4 every morning.
I like 3 to 4 as a baseline.
Yeah, because and I think it's a good thing for people too, as kind of an entry-level nootropic, because you can titrate, as you said, right? And if you start to hit the threshold where you're like, wow, I really noticed this, it's not, I don't find it to be jarring. And I've given them to people, and sometimes they're like, I don't feel anything. And I'm like, how many did you take? And they're like, 2. I go, well, on the bottle it says take 6, so take 4, see how you feel. Take 6, take 8, because as you said so brilliantly, every brain is so unique. There's no 2 brains alike. They're snowflake brains. But it's not as strong as some of the things that I would categorize more as smart drugs, things that are totally lab.
Things you wouldn't want to take every day.
Yeah, lab synthesized,
Right.
Your modafinil, the racetams, things like that. But it's really interesting to see too that, to the point of brains being different, I've talked about modafinil a lot because I like it mainly these days just when I fly, because I find that I'm not as fatigued when I land. I'll do it like before I land, I'll take maybe like a quarter of modafinil or a half or something, and then I land and I'm actually like fairly awake and able to handle the things when I land. But I've talked about it a lot, so my friends are always curious and they'll take it, and I said, just take a quarter so you don't feel too speedy. They take a quarter, they don't feel anything, and then they'll move up. I've had friends that have taken a whole 200 milligram tab of modafinil and they don't feel anything at all.
Wow.
And then other friends take a quarter and they're like, I felt like I was on meth, I hate this. It's so interesting to see like that. But I think you run a little more of a risk of an adverse sort of reaction like that when you're doing things that are just, I guess, as you said, just kind of activating one part of the brain without having that systems approach. And then finding the right blend of these different things is kind of like poor man's chemistry, and maybe not as universally reliable and predictable as just like the Qualia mind is. You're going to get, as you said, the precursors, the things that open the pathways, the things that get the metabolites out of the brain that are produced. It's pretty cool. It's brilliant.
Yeah, and that sold me on that. So I had a long conversation with Daniel Schmachtenberger, and we talked 5 minutes about this, and ended up talking like 45 minutes or an hour and a half about just systems and medicine, and it was just fascinating. Then a month later he called me up and he said, would you be interested in being our medical director? And that was the history of me becoming medical director for them.
That's cool. What other things do you do as part of your role there? I know they've come out with like a sleep product, and they've very carefully dripped out other products in their product line relatively slowly. I'm assuming because of the R&D that goes into the systems for each particular thing they want to work on.
It's interesting. Daniel is like Daniel Schmachtenberger has been the primary formulator, and he's just brilliant with the way he thinks. And I can remember one time we were out there and we decided we were going to develop the sleep formula. And we'd been working on it we had an Excel spreadsheet online we had 250 different ingredients, and we would classify them in what pathway they affected, what cross pathways they would interact with, what they needed to support them. So we had this huge spreadsheet, and then I went out there, and Daniel's a bit of a vampire. He
I remember that from his interview.
Yeah.
He's like, we can't start until 5 p.m. or something like that. Yeah,
that's Pacific time, and I'm in bed by that time. So. But I went out there, and we would start like 1 o'clock each day, but we would be just locked in a room. It was me, Daniel, and Dan Party. But the 3 Dans in the room, and we had a whiteboard, and we were just marking off ingredients and adding ingredients. This was getting the sleep formula, but we did that for 3 straight days. And it was like 8-9 hours in that one room, and just throwing things out and discussing, well, if we do that, then we can't do this one, and it was amazing to go through that, but it was all theory. And then they started formulating the product and testing it, making adjustments in that, and we get feedback on that. But the formulation process is a lot of fun with them.
Oh, I can imagine. When I first got this product, I didn't really understand the systems approach, so I looked at it at first. I remember looking at the ingredient deck and going like, they just put everything that you could possibly put in your brain to help it in one thing. It's probably overkill, or else there's not enough of any of the one thing to really do anything. That was just my first glance at it, because I'm used to things that have 3 things, and you feel it in a way. But yeah, it's pretty amazing what you guys have done with that stuff. Going back to the kind of overarching nootropic topic, do you have any distinction between a nootropic and a smart drug, or are those just 2 words that people use interchangeably for the same kind of deal?
Yeah, same thing. What do you consider smart? What do you consider cognitive enhancement? Some people think increasing empathy is cognitive enhancement. Other people think you've got to increase intelligence, or you've got to increase creativity. So cognitive enhancement, smart drugs, nootropics, it all falls into the same category, but the definition of that's going to vary by the person.
I think I've, in my own mind, separated them based on if something is synthesized, like modafinil or aniracetam or piracetam or something like that, versus acetylcholine or some other kind of precursor that's more plant-based, or an extract derived from an herb or something in nature. I've kind of broken them up like that, but I think it's just my own way of determining whether or not I'm taking something that comes from nature or something that comes from a lab. And ultimately, obviously, if you break down the constituents of an herb and you're extracting the effective molecules out of it, then, well, that's now kind of synthesized in a way too. So pretty much everything that's not just a ground up herb, like a kratom or something like that you just don't touch, you just grind it up and eat it, I guess would be qualified as that.
Why are you so prejudiced?
Well, here's the thing I came to recently, actually, because I was thinking about, it's an interesting thing maybe to kind of explore, but I was thinking about the difference between something like iboga or ayahuasca or psilocybin, where you have something from the plant or fungi kingdom. People always call mushrooms plant medicines. It irritates me because it's not a plant. Or something like bufo, 5-MeO, again, not a plant. I don't know what to call them all, but these are things that just exist in nature on their own. I guess with ayahuasca, you got to brew 2 things together to get the inhibition of the liver, to get the DMT in and all that. But there's a school of thought amongst the kind of shamanic community that something's only legitimate if it just comes from nature.
Mhm.
And that something like an LSD or MDMA that has to be completely synthesized in a lab is of lesser value or not part of nature. And I was thinking about this, I want to see what your take is. Because humans are nature, right? We're this is a fake plant, but when I see plants, I often remind myself, like, you're the same as that. I see a deer in the neighborhood, and I used to think, well, there's an animal and then there's a me, but like, I am that animal. I'm the dirt, I'm the soil, the microorganisms. So thinking of oneself as nature then would lead one down the path that if a human mind and intention had the idea to synthesize certain molecules or combine different chemicals in a lab, that the net result of that is also a natural product because humans are natural.
Well, regardless of that, though, I mean, you know, I get into this discussion a lot because people will come in and they'll say, I only want natural products. And I'm like, okay, why? And they're like, oh, because they're better for you. And like, you have no idea what the body's actually doing with this to you. I mean, supplements, plants, foods that we eat, they're foreign bodies to our body. I mean, they're not, we don't produce them. So we're putting in a foreign substance. And what they do is they go in and they react with our cells. You know, even plants, most plants have a low-grade toxicity to them, to the body. And that's a benefit, though. It's a hormetic benefit on the liver. It upregulates the detoxification system, but you're actually poisoning yourself with them.
Like if you take a bitter herb or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
But medicines are the same way. You know, medicines, even though they're synthetic from the lab, they're still an input to the system that the system doesn't say, oh, it's natural or that's a plant. It's seeing a molecule that's affecting it, and it responds to it. So it has to react to these inputs that go in. So I get people to get off the idea of classifying anything. Just look at it as an input to the system. Is it giving you the net result that you're looking for? Because everything we put in, there's a pro and a con. Absolutely everything. Even foods that we eat, there's a pro and a con to every food that we eat. And they're bionutrients is what they are. And beyond the caloric aspect of them, they have all kinds of other impacts on the body. And you have to look at it and say, okay, is this going to net result in the benefit I'm looking for? And people went down this road with metformin, and it cracks me up that people talk about metformin because it's a derivative of the French lilac. I mean, they just took out the poisonous parts of the French lilac so they could use the molecule. But they were talking about this, you know, it's a great longevity medication. And we've been using it for years in the longevity industry, but there was this report about how it causes some toxicity to mitochondria. And so people were like, oh, it damages mitochondria, you gotta stop taking it. I'm like, so what? I mean, what's the net result, though, that you're getting? I mean, you get all these positives, you have this one negative that you've identified so far. What's the net result? What are you trying to achieve with it? And the net result is, yes, it's going to elevate this outcome that you're looking for. So taking, and this is the problem with complex systems, when people try to look at the individual parts of it, like in a watch, you know, we can look at this one cog and know exactly what it does, and, you know, if you remove it, you know what happens then. The human system doesn't work that way, because all of these interactive pieces play off of each other and have feedback loops, and it's just, it's impossible to actually isolate, so we have to do predictabilities with it. And people do, they get on this this kick of, you know, this is better for you or because it's natural. Well, you know, there's a lot of natural things that will kill you too. And, you know, do you want to
try rattlesnake venom?
Exactly. I mean, you could do DMT from a lab and not have to throw up, or you can do the ayahuasca and throw up. So, you know, it's a plus minus for just about everything.
Well, I've thought about that debate from another perspective too. So you have a plant, right? And the plant has its own intelligence. And people that really believe in medicine plants of all types, not just psychoactive ones, sort of trust that plant, that plant has put together certain molecules that signal reactions in our bodies and in our brains. But if we're really the same as a living organism, if we take ourselves out of this hierarchy that humankind is above the intelligence of a plant, yet we're putting so much faith into the intelligence of that plant, right? What about the chemist who synthesizes some formula? Are they not doing the same exact thing as the plant is doing?
Right.
Right? It's like, the ayahuasca vine. It's got dimethyltryptamine in it, and it's making it out of soil and water and sunlight, right?
Yeah.
And then it took another human to go, oh, interesting. Well, if we put this plant, this vine with this leaf, and we boil it up and we drink it, something else happens, right? So that's the system's kind of approach to this. There's a synergy between the work that plants do, just like the work that animals do, by making nutrients that are not bioavailable in the soil and in the plants available to us, in the case of like a animal fat, right, that has things that we can't get in a concentrated way from nature and our bodies need and use. So I think that's another way to kind of zoom out from that and not be so dualistic in it's either this or that, because the human mind is essentially doing the same thing as the plant is. It's just using a laboratory instead of its own grounded, innate chemistry to produce that signaling molecule.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I've arrived at it, because with things like ketamine, I mean, that even has a feel of something not natural. You know what I mean? I don't know, there's something with you, when you do ayahuasca or bufo or psilocybin, it feels to me more natural in my body than like a ketamine does, for example.
Well, I think a lot of that, though, has to do with the set and setting.
Right,
I mean, these ketamine clinics, these sterile environments where you go in and you're laying on a table with an IV in your arm, and, there's not much ritual or ceremony associated with that.
Right.
So the set and setting have a huge impact on the outcomes that people have. That's why ayahuasca is so much related to ceremony and ritual, because that informs on the outcome. It was like when Brian Morescu and the Immortality Key.
Oh yeah, I'm about halfway through that.
He was talking about how they would use the entheogens in the wine and the bread in church, and people would go in and they would take it, they would have these experiences, but they were kind of framed in the set and setting that it was a religious experience they were having, because they were eating the body of God and drinking and the blood of Jesus, and it gives them that pre-framing of things, and then when they experience it, that's what they tend to experience. So when people do the ritual aspects with the ayahuasca, you tend to evolve into that experience as part of the ritual.
Yeah, so true. I guess one could be led then to, I'm not suggesting people do this, I think that you should have a guide, but let's say one was to do ketamine and actually be outdoors immersed in nature, you probably would have a much different subjective experience.
Oh, for sure.
And perhaps not have something that feels so, I don't know, it always feels a little bit mechanistic to me.
I don't understand. I never got why people started ketamine to party.
Oh my God, nightmare. Oh my God, I can't imagine a worse experience.
That's insane.
I remember a couple of years ago I was watching one of those intervention shows or something, and they were following this kid who was addicted to ketamine, and he would do, I don't know how many milligrams, but a massive dose of it, and then just kind of hang out and party, and I'm like, hey, how's the guy walking? How do you get across the room? Because it's so sort of paralyzing.
It's an anesthetic.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, interesting thread. Where I want to go next with you, my friend, let me see, I have so many questions for you. It could probably be a 2-hour plus interview if I'm not careful. Not that I'm mad at that. By the way, do you have anywhere to be? Are you good for the long haul?
I'm good.
Okay, good. I love that. What about the synergistic effect of taking something like Qualia Mind? You kind of alluded to this earlier as your foundation, because it's not terribly upsetting or dysregulating. It's pretty mild, I find, even in a high dose. There's just kind of, someone turn the lights on. Are there any other stacks that you've experimented with that as the foundation, like taking a racetam or some of these other nootropics that are a little more hard-hitting?
Well, prior to using Qualia or finding Qualia, I was creating my own stacks, and I would take a similar approach that they would have. Okay, let's get increased blood flow, let's look at these precursor molecules that need to be supplied there to keep the engine running. So I would do like alpha GPC pretty commonly. I would use some type of nitric oxide booster, and then do the nootropic, and it would experiment with the racetams, with some of the adrafinils, just different forms, and there's 100 different classifications of these, and you just kind of work with them to find one that you like. And it just so happened that I like Noopept, which is a peptide, which I love peptides. I mean, that's the way to go in my opinion, because peptides are different than what we talked about in the body being unfamiliar and reacting. Peptides, the body knows what it is. It's something that it produces, and it's an amino acid sequence goes in there. It goes to the receptor that it's designed to go to, and the body knows how to respond to it. So it's a very on-target effect. And Noopept is wonderful. Some people don't get a response from it, but I find that people who do respond to it really love it. Unfortunately, it's not available other than as a research chemical right now, which is kind of ironic considering the body makes it. And it's a very simple amino acid.
Well, that's a good segue into the peptides then. Something that I've experimented with over the past couple of years. I've done the standard stuff, BP157, TB500, Melanotan, and DSIP, and I think CMAX, a few different ones here and there. And my body, I guess it's because the reason you just explained, I respond really well to peptides, like they do what they're supposed to do. But the thing that I found challenging about it, and I think a lot of people listening to this will also find challenging, is that they're for research only online, and so unless you know a doctor or a clinic that you can go through that has access to a legit compounding pharmacy, it's kind of the Wild West. Like, I use peptide scientists just because enough smart doctors and people have said, yeah, they're legit. But even when you get your hands on some that are clean and not tainted and are actually real, the dosing of them is actually really challenging. You got to be really good at math, right? Because you're counting, well, how many mLs does this syringe have, and how much of the backwater do I put in there to get it's just like mind-boggling. So I've gone in and out of it at different times just because it's so difficult to kind of figure out on your own if you're not a doctor that understands these things. Are you guys in your clinic working with peptides?
Oh yeah, we've been working with peptides for probably 5 years now. And it comes and goes because sometimes the compounding pharmacies are able to make them, and then other times the FDA sends them a letter and says quit making it, and so we lose things that we start working with. I've really had amazing results with most of the peptides. I mean, Thymus and beta-4 is a healing peptide. It is just unbelievable. Thymosin alpha, which boosts the immune system, and there was a lot of docs that got in trouble during COVID because they were promoting it as beneficial to the immune system.
Yeah, God forbid we help people build an immune system.
Well, it's strange because they took it off the market. FDA came in and said, you can't do this, and they sanctioned doctors for making the claims. And yet there's plenty of studies on it. On the commercial brand, Thymosin, which is a commercially made thymosin alpha, but you can't really patent something the body already makes. So the only control they had was to actually go in and have some reason why the compounding pharmacists couldn't make it. Well, Thymosin is not approved in the United States yet, so they said it's not a product to compound something. It has to be a component of an existing product that's in the commercial market, but not the same. And that's happened with a couple of them, like tesamorelin, well, tesamorelin is kind of a modified growth hormone releasing hormone. But there's, it's $1,000 a month to treat AIDS wasting syndrome. And you can get it from a compounding pharmacy at 1/5 of that price.
Right.
But
do you think that's behind the FDA periodically coming after peptides? Is it like an influence of the pharmaceutical industrial complex that's like,
I mean, that's
doesn't want anyone to
the
compete
conspiracy that everybody goes for.
Doesn't want anyone to compete with patented drugs that are, much more profitable?
I mean, the thing is they're enforcing the laws that exist. I mean, although there's been a couple that were like, wait, that doesn't qualify under that law, but they went ahead and did it. There's been a few like that, but not many. I mean, most of them, they do. They come up with requirements like to get tesamorelin off, they said, okay, you can't compound anything over, I think it was 40 amino acids long. And so that took off a couple of the peptides. They just said it's just not safe. Once you get that long, you can't guarantee the purity as well. But who knows? I mean, I'm more of an optimist in thinking that there's not some evil agenda out there to take these away, but just people ill-informed is.
Well, it's also, I'm so just innately anti-establishment and paranoid, so I'm always like, it's the man trying to hold us back. But on the other side, like let's say the FDA just went, okay, it's the Wild West, everyone do what you want. I mean, we'd have a lot of either fake or tainted peptides on the market, and there probably still are coming from China or wherever they come from. But it's like there kind of needs to be some regulatory agency to make sure that.
Well, there is. It's called Reddit. and it works extremely well. I mean, companies that are putting out false stuff, they get found out really quick because the people on Reddit, they're experienced with them, and they'll take somebody's product and they'll say, this didn't work. And then other people will chime in on it, and suddenly the company just gets all this bad press. So, this crowdsourcing of this stuff, of the nootropics, I mean, that's where I learned most about nootropics when I first started down the path, was on Reddit.
Yeah, me too. Me too. When it comes to the ones that you mentioned that support the thymus and thus the immune system, I wanted to dive into that a little bit because I was talking to one of our two-time guests and a friend named Robert Slovak a couple days ago, and we were talking about immunity, and he said, Luke, it's all about the thymus. He said, when you're younger, your thymus is about the size of a walnut. By the time you're, whatever it was, 50, it's the size of a pea. A lot of people don't pay much attention to this little gland. And then, my next question was, well, I'm 50. How much has my thymus shrunk and how do I help it? And we didn't get to that part of the conversation. So these peptides that signal to the thalamus, how do they work? And is that what makes them effective at boosting immunity? Because they're kind of nourishing that gland again, or what?
Well, your glands atrophy completely by 50. I mean, by 30, most people don't have any function of the thymus gland anymore. Dr. Fahey, who did this study with Horvath on the epigenetic age reversal with growth hormone, vitamin D, DHEA, and metformin, he was doing some work using, and I think it was thymosin alpha. He was pretty vague on what he was using, but he was using growth hormone and thymosin alpha and something else, but he was getting actual regrowth of the thymus.
Wow.
People, he was doing MRI studies, and I had a conversation with him, and he, I could tell that he was probably using it, but I can't say for sure, because he was very secretive about the research. But that's a big deal, bringing the thymus back. I mean, there's the potential, and I've heard from a researcher that with the rejuvenation of the thymus, they were able to get people to resolve autoimmune thyroid issues.
Wow.
I mean,
that's huge.
That's all just hearsay, but
Yeah.
That's what they were talking about, and that's a big part of aging. I mean, we look at CD4, CD8 cells, and we say, how much of these are aged cells versus naive cells, and this is a good marker of aging. It's called the extrinsic age. It's marking the age of the immune system, and things that can boost that that we have seen. When we were able to use Thymus and alpha, we were actually seeing that happen in clients. Again, anecdotal, our experience, we don't have a good research study on it, but what we look at is good sense making when it comes to informing decisions and then setting up ways to measure whether it's working or not. And with that, we can measure the CD4, CD8 levels and see what was happening.
Oh, interesting. Let's run through a couple of the other peptides. So a couple that I mentioned, I think these are the most ubiquitous with peptide users, is the BPC-157.
Mm-hmm.
Is a body protective compound, is that what that stands for? And then the TB-500. Those seem to be often used in conjunction. And those are ones that I've experimented with, just doing them like a subcutaneous injection, just systemically. But I've also used them in my bum, shoulder, and elbow, and things like that, which is typically a little more painful of a shot. Mm-hmm. But there is one school of thought that using peptides like that locally at the problem area doesn't make any difference, that you just do them systemically, like with a sub-Q shot, and then there are other people that say, oh no, they work much better if you do them locally. Have you had any differential of experience between those?
We don't have a good answer on that. You know, I'm always in favor of a more systemic approach, depending on what you're trying to do. I mean, if you do have traumatized tissue that is in a very local area, you know, why not inject into that area? I mean, it's still creating a systemic effect. It's just being a little bit more concentrated in that particular area. But some of these don't necessarily work right at that area. They work at something distant to create a response that causes it to happen. Like BPC-157, one of its best things is its ability to create angiogenesis, which is growth of new blood vessels. We found just spectacular results with the oral BPC-157 with people with any gut dysbiosis or intestinal issues. I mean, it's almost 100% of the people we put it on. We don't even use probiotics, prebiotics, gut healing protocols. We use BPC. We have put on it for a month or two, and then they're done, and they're all healed up. And
you know, that's interesting, because I've been using this oral BPC-157 from a company called BioPure. And I read a bunch of stuff on their site, and I was like, it seems much more legit than some of the other oral versions, and I forget exactly what their metrics were, but it was convincing enough that I thought I'd try it. And I just ran out of it, actually. I gotta get some more. But it's interesting because my gut has improved a lot, but I also do enzymes and different, probiotic runs and eat a lot of bone broth, and I do other things. So it's one thing that kind of sucks about being the kind of experimental guy that I am is it's often difficult for me to say exactly what's doing what. So I can't unequivocally say, I just lived my normal life and I started doing the oral BPC-157 from BioPure. Thanks BioPure for sending it to me, I appreciate it. I can't say that it was just that, because I did all these other things. And I don't have the kind of discipline to just do isolated tests on things, which is, it's a disadvantage, because I can't share that with the audience and say, okay, I didn't change anything about this one thing and here's what it did for me. But I can say that a combination of, using the Bioptimizer's enzymes and the Just Thrive spore-based probiotics, like a lot of my sponsors on the show, it's stuff that I take all the time, and as a net result of all of those things, like my gut is better than ever. Digestion, everything. I used to have horrible heartburn and just, digestive problems of not regular bowel movements, too much one way or the other. I won't be too graphic, but that's interesting, because I kind of forgot about that part of the BPC-157. I just took it because, well, it's good for you,
I should share, I have a conflict of interest because I have a supplement company that we sell BPC-157s.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you guys have an oral version of it?
Yeah.
Oh, no shit. What's it called?
BPC-157.
Oh, that's okay.
It's Apeiron, Apeiron.
Oh, and is that the name of your clinic too?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we have a genetic company, we have a supplement company, we have an education company, and we have the clinics.
Wow.
And a mastermind.
Well, your brain's got to be really working in order to manage all that. Okay, so BPC-157, and then what about TB-500? That one seems to be popular and kind of used for similar stuff.
Yeah, they kind of cross over. Like when we had it available for prescribing, people would have a good result with. It's usually the first one you try, you will claim it has a better result for you. So if you try BPC 157 first, and then you try Thymus and beta 4, you'll be like, oh no, BPC worked better. If you try Thymus and beta 4 first, then you tend to get the response. I like the combination of two, because anything, for me, I don't like any one thing to go after something. I like combinations. Just
Systems guy.
Right.
Yeah.
And so a combination of BPC 157, Thymus and beta 4, and like AOD, those work really well together for tissue healing. And I've seen really great accelerations in people that had been stagnant in their rehabilitation process, and they go on that and they just have really amazing results with them.
That's cool. And then what about this one? I always find funny, but also useful in some cases, and that's this melanotan that results in this crazy tanning, and also sometimes too long-lasting erections in some people. What does melanotan have a place in your wheelhouse of peptides?
Yeah, melanotan's pretty ubiquitous. I do use it every year, just because I don't like sunscreen. I don't like how it feels. I don't like having to put it on, and I'm not really well protected up here, so I feel like having the tan is the most protective thing. And with melanotan, I can get a tan with much less UV exposure, and very rapidly. I mean, within a couple days of just like 30-minute exposure for a couple days, and suddenly you've got like a full summer tan. So it doesn't take much to do it. But again, it's not approved for human use.
Right.
But the melanotan 2 and the melanotan 1 are different animals.
Ah, okay, because I'm trying to think back, this is a couple years ago, but I got some of the melanotan, and it didn't really do the tanning thing, but it definitely did the erection thing, like to a fault.
That was melanotan 2.
Okay, there you go, thank you. Because I thought, I guess I'm olive skin, maybe I just didn't notice it or something.
The melanotan 2 crosses the blood-brain barrier, whereas melanotan 1 does not.
Ah, okay.
So melanotan 1 is better if you're just wanting to get a tan, although it seems to be less good at it as melanotan 2. But melanotan 2 crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it stimulates alpha MSH receptors. This is where you get the erection piece of it. And in fact, they found that to be so pronounced that they took the melanotan 2 and they said, what part of this is stimulating this response? And they found a small segment called PT-141. PT-141 is the erection peptide.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, you know what? That's what I was taking.
Oh, okay.
Because
that will...
Yeah, it was PT-141. I've been out of it for a while. I liked it, and it definitely works. I mean, you get erections for days. The thing that was weird about it was totally unpredictable in terms of when it was going to hit. So one would think they were perhaps going to get frisky on a particular evening, and so maybe at 7 p.m., you think, well, it'll be a couple hours before that transpires. And then nothing really happens, and then you find yourself waking up at 1 in the morning like a 13-year-old and not being able to get it to stop for many hours.
Yeah.
So, and then, said partner might not be around or awake anymore, and you're kind of like left there with your D in your hand. Your coin of phrase.
Can't roll over in bed. I mean,
you got a full pup tent going there. So that, I kind of was like, there's something here, but I didn't continue with it to try and get a predictable result with it, but yeah, absolutely. And no side effects of like, a headache or something like that one would get with the Viagra or Cialis.
I have a lot of elderly clients that have found just complete saving grace in PT-141 because the phosphodiesterase inhibitors weren't working for them, and PT-141 actually gave them that sexual life back. But yeah, it's a problem. I mean, you can take it, and sometimes it'll take 8-9 hours to even onset, whereas other times it'll take 2 hours.
Yeah, I found that to be true. I guess that's why I didn't keep doing it. I thought, well, this could be useful, but you'd have to really like fine tune it to understand, the duration and onset and things like that. Do you think the the PT-141 would have a similar effect on females as well? Do they get like increased arousal or anything like that, anecdotally?
I've had some females that tried it because they were looking for that, that libido enhancement piece, and not really much of a result. But
Okay.
although they do get some sexual arousal with the melanotan too, in certain females.
Interesting.
Mhm.
I wonder with the Melanotan 1, if it's having this sort of protective effect that allows you to get less UV in a shorter period of time, and then tan, I wonder if there's any possibility of it helping with the production of D3. Do you think it has any like interaction there? Has anyone done any testing to see if your D3 levels go up because you're able to take in and soak up so much sun?
Well, I mean, the tanning actually does increase. The tan skin does better with D3 than with creating the D2. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I think it would. I have all of my clients supplement D3, so I don't rely on the sun because from a genetic standpoint, there's so many people that just don't do very well with converting.
Yeah, yeah. With the Melanotan 1, is this something that a fair-skinned person could use? Someone that's, a freckled kind of complexion?
I've seen it, but you have to watch because the initial thing is the freckles get darker.
Okay.
And they can darken pretty significantly. I mean, people will be concerned about the risk of melanoma. There was one reported case, but the woman also had done 20 years of sunbed.
Oh, damn.
So hard to say if there was an actual
Yeah.
causation there. But you have to watch for that because they tend to darken freckles and they stay dark.
Oh, really?
I actually had a scar on my leg and I took it and got tanned, and the scar's just like permanently dark from that 1 year that I got the scar and used it.
Wow, interesting. And then what about for cognitive function? I mentioned Cmax, and I think I've done a couple other peptides that I got from Craig Conover. He would send me these sort of preloaded syringes that had a nice blend of different peptides. I didn't pay that much attention. I just said, he calls them the neuro something, and I found them to be effective, but I couldn't keep up with it, you know what I mean? I ran out and then kind of forgot, but I think Cmax was in there and maybe a couple other things.
Cmax and C-Lank both
Right, there you go.
are
Yeah.
really, really nice for some people, but not for many. Many people will take them and it's like, it didn't do anything for me. One that's been doing pretty well is RG3. It's not a peptide, but RG3 is it also goes under the brand of Synapsin, but it is a ginkgoside derivative along with some methyl B12, something else I think in it, but it's a nasal spray, and I've had better results with that than I have with the peptide boosters, the short-term enhancers. But I tell you, we were talking about this earlier, but the ketone esters, one of the best things I've seen.
All right, thanks for reminding me of that. And what do you think that is? Is it just you're giving the brain more ketones for energy? And so those different activities that the brain, as we know, the brain burns up so much energy working, doing all
Yeah,
the
it's
things.
20% of your metabolism, and if you're focused on using it, it's going to be a lot more.
That's crazy. So do you think it's just the ketone esters is just purely just energy, just fuel?
It's just feeding a very clean fuel directly into it.
Yeah, I take these company Perfect Keto, and they have some ketone esters that actually taste pretty good. There's like a chocolate.
No.
I mean, to me, okay, because I've had just plain ketone esters, and I can eat or drink anything if it's good for me. Like the taste is secondary, I'll get over it. But maybe it's because I had those and they were so disgusting that I think the Perfect Keto ones. There's like a berry one and a chocolate one. I don't know. I put a big old scoop in water, stir it up, I chug it down, and go roast it.
They taste okay. They don't have enough esters in them.
All right.
I mean, I have truly tried every one on the market. I just tried a new one today from Juvenescence. It's a chocolate one, and I took it and I was like, oh my god, this actually tastes good. And then I was like, no, okay. Got the aftertaste, and it was the ketone ester taste.
Well, saying they taste good, I'll admit, is a little overstatement. I guess they taste, let's say they taste better than plain, okay? Because at least you're like, oh, I recognize some chocolatey flavor in there. It's better than just
No, for me, the flavor almost makes it worse because you get like fooled a little bit by it. Like the delta G ketones comes in this like really syrupy like berry flavor, and you take it and you taste it, and it tastes like a really strong cough syrup flavor, and that kind of goes down. But then the ketones come on, so the aftertaste, you're still getting the ketones.
Right.
So for me, I'm going with I'd use the Ketamine, the KE4s.
Okay.
Just do a couple capfuls of that and just get it over with, rinse it down, and I'm good.
All right, good. And you were saying that you do that before physical exercise too? Huh?
Yeah, before workouts, before any real big cognitive lift, sometimes for sleep too.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, speaking of the brain burning energy, as I get more tuned into my brain function and just always kind of optimizing that and getting a more narrow path where I can kind of tell what's doing what. I think it was yesterday. I attempted to adopt a new email program. It's called Superhuman, and a shout out to them. I think they're doing something very cool. I mean, it has potential, but I did the onboarding call with them.
They turned me down.
Oh, really? I could have referred you when I was still in.
I had too many emails for the beta program.
Oh, okay. They're able to do it now, by the way.
Okay.
It's very cool. I mean, it's AI, intuitive. I mean,
I know, it looked really awesome.
I think it could be.
Like, they don't want me.
It could be great for the right type of brain, but we did the onboarding consult, and it was maybe 30 minutes, and my brain was exhausted afterward because it's just, I don't know, it's the way I'm wired. That type of focus just wears me out. Yeah. Where I could do a lot. I could sit down and play guitar for 5 hours, and I feel energized afterward. I mean, I can use my brain in different ways, but that, not to put them down, as I said, it's pretty incredible, but it was just abundantly clear to me very quickly, like this would not work for me. My brain it's just too, it's not visual enough. It's like there's a lot of triggers that are happening, and keyboard shortcuts you have to remember. And I think if you really learned it and you had a brain that was good at that, it would revolutionize your email experience.
If you were superhuman.
Yeah, if you're superhuman. But by the end of it, I was like, okay, and I'd already signed up for the first month, and at the end, I said, my last question was, and what do I do if I want a refund? Because I was exhausted, and then I went and did my new calm, meditation thing. I did 20 minutes of that, laying in the sun, and then I was ready to go on with it, but I really had to recoup that brain power, and it was an example of that. Like, wow, I just burned up a lot of energy trying to get my brain to become malleable around a way that it doesn't intuitively like to work. So definitely some truth to that. What about, what's your take on methylene blue? Have you looked into that?
Don't have much experience with that one.
Okay.
I just haven't been real excited about what I've read about it.
Okay.
So it hasn't been one of those ones that's high on my list to go down. I mean, there's so many out there. I just got a guitar, and I'm going to learn how to play the guitar. So I'm going to do a combination of some neurostimulation that can boost learning, and then maybe some dihexa with that. Dihexa is really amazing with the rapidity of dendritic growth that occurs with it. So
cool.
Hoping to hack the quick learning of a guitar.
For those that hear this conversation and get really hyped up on peptides, I mean, the Qualia, they can just go to Neurohacker. Is it neurohacker.com?
Yeah.
Yeah, Neurohacker. You can get it. It's affordable. It lasts. It's amazing. It comes in huge bottles. That's done. That's easy for people.
Get the subscription. You can cancel it at any time, and it's a lot cheaper. So.
Yeah. That's what I do. But there's going to be a lot of people listening to this, like, oh my God, peptides are amazing. I've heard about them, and now they know a lot about them. But as I said, it's kind of a dark web thing. It's a little bit difficult to navigate. So I've had great success with Peptide Sciences, that site, and everyone I've talked to said, oh, they're legit, don't worry about it. But again, the mixing of them and all that, very complicated. So if one wanted to explore this, is this something they could do by going through your clinic or other clinicians or doctors that are familiar and well versed in the peptide world?
We use the ones that are approved right now. We've used the other ones after they were taken off, so we know the correct dosing of all of them. So I'll have clients that'll say, I'm going to do this one way or the other, so you can either help me to do it safe or not. And that first do no harm criteria is there. So because I've seen some people like overdo it, like somebody was supposed to take Melanotan 2, and after they mixed it, they were supposed to inject like 0.15 cc's. I mean, 15/10 of a cc, and they injected 1.5 cc's because they said it didn't look like it was the right amount.
That sounds like something my dumbass would do.
Paid the price for it. It was a long night for them. But yeah, I mean, there is the places where you buy the injectable peptides, they say right on the vial, not for human use, and they give you 0 instructions, so you're left on your own to figure that out.
Yeah.
And it amazes me because it's just something I know how to do, but it amazes me that some of these really smart people are just at a loss for how do you get this many milligrams per injection and mix it the right way. So yeah, I mean there are some resources out there. There's like a peptide mixing calculator.
I found that eventually.
That
that
people
was
have
helpful.
been using, and it works for some of them. But you've still got to know what milligram dose you want to be getting. In the different ones.
And also, like, I used that calculator, and I kind of got myself deeper in the weeds until I figured I had to really spend some brain power. The same kind of brain power I tried to use in that onboarding call. That's like the shit my brain does not like to do. So I'm looking at my syringes, and I'm like, well, it has these numbers on it. Is that the numbers they're talking about on the site? I mean, it was complicated, but eventually I figured it out. But I think that is one of the barriers to entry of trying to do it yourself.
It is.
So, like at your clinic, for example, do you ever work with people remotely, or is this like they have to come in for the full-on program and see you guys in person and all that?
We'll initially start off working with some people remotely just because of COVID. We traditionally did not. We always required that visit to us. With COVID, we've been a little bit more lenient on that. We have a mastermind program where the mastermind members have the option to have medical care through us as well, and we'll work with them remotely, but we have events here in town and they're required to come to the event, be seen by their clinician. We have 2 PAs and a nurse practitioner that work in the office, and they're the ones that do most of the one-on-one stuff. I take very few clients myself, but I oversee all the others.
Okay, got it. And the last thing I want to ask you about is, and we alluded to it a bit around neuroplasticity, but around microdosing.
Mm-hmm.
I've been for, a couple of years now doing psilocybin microdosing, 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams, so 1/10 of a gram or 2/10 of a gram, like not a discernible, like, oh my God, I'm tripping and seeing rainbows. But definitely has absolutely helped with my mood regulation, general sense of well-being, creativity, focus. I'll do that probably maybe 3 days a week or something. I kind of just split it out. I have someone who will remain unnamed who makes an incredible tincture that has all of the other medicinal mushrooms and some niacin there. And people are going to DM me on Instagram and be like, can I have your contact? I'm like, guys, this shit is illegal. Like, I'm admitting I broke the law, okay? Come get me, but I'm not going to connect people. It's just not right. At this point, I think that we'll move past that in terms of legislation, but for now, I'm sorry guys, I can't give it to you. But he makes these great little tinctures, and I turned a friend of mine onto it, actually 2 friends back in LA, who have never done any nootropics. They've not done...
They went straight to LSD.
Yeah, they've not done any sort of cognitive enhancement, microdosing. They don't do any drugs or drink. They're sober guys. And I said, hey, this is technically a drug, but be careful, but it's helped me a lot. And I had 2 guys that try it, and the psilocybin tincture changed their life. I mean, their relationships improved, they're doing better at work. It just was a huge needle mover. And again, for me, I notice it, but I'm doing so much stuff, it's hard to, isolate anything. So that was the psilocybin experiment on 2 total normies. And that really showed me, wow, this is real, this is powerful. Because they didn't change anything else in their lives, and they both just had these exponential healing and growth spurts. And then personally, actually from the same guy, and I definitely can't share this one, but I started doing LSD microdosing maybe a couple years ago. And I'll do 5 micrograms or 10 micrograms, I guess, 1/20th of a hit of acid or something like that. And again, not discernible, hence microdose, in terms of feeling high or anything like that, totally able to function. But on the 2 days or so that I do that per week, it's a guaranteed super productive, super focused, super creative day, and in the best mood ever. Which is why I don't do it every day, because I don't want my body to get used to it. So that's my subjective experience with those two microdoses. What's your take on microdosing, those two substances? What does it do? What makes it work? Anything that you have to share with us? And then finally, as a kind of a tail on that, do you see this becoming something in the future that becomes less regulated because of the obvious benefits?
First of all, I just don't want to hang out with you anymore because you into drugs and altered states. But yeah, I had to become a bit of an expert on some of the psychedelics because my clients are a lot of Silicon Valley executives, entrepreneurs. I mean, it's just ubiquitous in there, and you know, you've got to learn all about this stuff to understand how it's impacting health and what it's doing for the person, how it interacts with something you may prescribe them. Because most people are pretty straightforward with me. I mean, they tell me exactly what they're doing. And so, based on the research I've seen, based on the clients that I've seen that have been doing it, and the research is pretty clear. You look at MDMA, you look at psilocybin, you look at LSD. There are true medical indications, and there are indications in enhancement. Medical community is not going to be doing anything that deals with enhancement in any way. The ability to get more creative. LSD is really amazing in microdoses where it's not actually altering your perceptions or your normal state in that regard, but they report a sense of well-being all over, and their creativity, they're able to see things and how they work together. I think Steve Jobs was notorious for microdosing quite frequently, and he attributes the ability to come up with new ideas to that. I don't know how much of that is truth, but the studies are pretty good right now. Now, what will happen with it? I think the decriminalization is probably the best route to go with this stuff, because when it goes into the medical community, it becomes regulated, and it becomes regulated to the point that they exert their control over the way it's used. Like MDMA right now. I mean, there's a lot of people that are wanting to get the MDMA back available because, there's a book called Love Drugs by Earp and somebody else, and they're bioethicists out of, I think, Imperial College. But it's an amazing book, and it's a good kind of thesis on why MDMA should be made available to people. It's a true love drug. And we have plenty of anti-love drugs on the market. And it only becomes a drug and not a medication because it's illegal versus legal. Well, even things that are legal, if you buy Ativan from the pharmacy versus you buy Ativan from a street vendor, it's a drug. Pharmacy, it's a medication. So what's the differentiation there?
Yeah.
But the microdosing it needs to be studied more in depth. You can find studies online of it right now. I think Robin Carhart Harris had a really nice study on LSD microdosing that they did, and they looked at what type of creativity changes the way people were thinking and how it persisted after the microdose for days, even like a week out, without any psychological alterations in that regard.
Yeah, there's one thing that I'm curious about with the LSD microdosing specifically. It's like, I just wish I had a QEEG machine at home.
Yeah.
So whenever I do things, I'm like, God, I'm just so curious. Even just
do.
Really? Oh, that's so cool. Even just in a meditation, I go, oh, that was a deep one. I must have been in theta. I might even hit gamma there for a minute,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't have the ability to do that. But subjectively, with the LSD microdosing, something that's very unique about it is that it seems to have the ability to produce hemispheric synchronization, where I can be equally left and right brain, like analytical, creative, attention to detail, super focused, but then also very creative and in a really happy kind of free mood. And there's nothing else in my experience that creates reliably that same effect.
Well, psilocybin's pretty classic for the interconnectivity between them.
The same thing is true for psilocybin?
Yeah.
Because I definitely notice it more with LSD, that particular thing, where I can jump from like a very focused analytical task to a creative task, jump back and forth, like the bridge, what's the corpus callosum, is that what it's called? Seems like something's happening there.
Yeah.
Because I can like boink, 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 jump back and forth much easier. And typically that's difficult for me. Like I have to go into a creative project and get like in the creative zone, and then stop that, and then like take a break, shift gears, and go in and work on my taxes. You know, like there's not typically a way to kind of like merge those and just dance in and out of them. It's very pronounced. It's really cool.
Yeah, the mapping on the brain of people on psilocybin, you see that in the microdoses predominantly.
It shows the same stuff.
Yeah, I see the interconnectivity go through the roof.
Wow.
Yeah, there's, one thing you might want to look at is the Muse S.
Oh yeah,
That's essentially an EEG headband.
Right.
And I was talking with Ariel Garten, the founder, the other day, and she was telling me they did a polysomnograph comparison, and they were equal. They're getting ready to publish the data on it.
Really?
Yeah. So I'm interested to see if it can really map the brainwave patterns during meditation and stuff.
I had a Muse, and I liked it for that effect, but I ended up returning it. And nothing against Muse, and this is probably just my own, my own personal aversion.
Crazy, didn't it?
No, I liked it. Because it was cool, because I would try different styles of meditation. I'd be like, do my old school Vedic meditation, and I would get a certain type of result. And then I would just sort of daydream, or I might like do, any number of different kind of mindfulness practices. And it was interesting to see the quantification. But I didn't like it because there was no ability, at least at that time, to turn the Bluetooth off. And so I'm putting on like a Bluetooth halo on my brain, and I've had some pretty negative experiences with acute EMF exposure. I'm super sensitive to it, and I just have interviewed enough physicists and smart people that tell me what EMF actually does to you that it's like I don't want any EMF too close to me, and so I stopped using it. But I was kind of bummed because I did like that effect. So
if I got close to you,
I'm going to get a headache, man. I mean, that's the thing though with EMF. It's like, part of it's psychosomatic because of the power of the mind, right? If you think something's hurting you, it's hurting you worse than if you were ignorant of its existence. Right. But I had a situation in which I was living under these cell towers unknowingly, and I got really sick, like for 3 years. I mean, it just wrecked my life. It was horrible. So there's like a quasi PTSD around it. So I'm just like, this house we're remodeling, it's all hardwired, there's Ethernet everywhere, like, it's just no smart technology, none of that stuff, it's just old school. So when technologies come out and have, great benefits, but they also have that Bluetooth thing that you can't disable, I'm kind of like, I gotta wait until enough biohackers bitch about the EMF, and then they'll find a way to do it. But I don't think it would work with the Muse because the biofeedback is using Bluetooth. They would have to create like a wired version of it to eliminate the Bluetooth, it seems. But it was a very cool device. And
so I perspect it all in epigenetics. I mean, the body's always constantly adapting to stressors to be stronger.
Right.
That's what it does. I mean, we even know that people living in areas of the U.S. that have the highest background radiation from the environment, they actually live longer than people in lower levels. Yeah, because of hormetic effect. So
that's crazy, dude.
To be more anti-fragile. I mean, that's just the thing that happens. They did a study on people working on the docks of nuclear subs and monitored their radiation exposure over years, and they found that they had higher longevity than others. They didn't even publish this data at first because they were like, this is too far out there for people.
That's wild.
You can look, like I said, everything has a good and a bad to it.
Right.
And evolutionarily, and this is the reason we die is so that we can turn over our genes and the adaptations that have occurred with the changing environments that occur. So from an epigenetic standpoint, how do you create the next version of the organism that's stronger and stronger and stronger? I mean, even now, if we would take you back and put you in the environment of 12,000 years ago, the paleo environment, you couldn't really survive because all of your adaptations are designed for the current world where
Yeah.
it is. It wouldn't be that you lack skills, it's just that your body wasn't adapted to.
Your body's going, wait, it's not 68 degrees 24/7?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
That's so funny, the hermetic stress of EMF. That's interesting, because I've thought about that, but my timeline is much longer. I think, okay,
Well, you're talking about high dose to under a cell tower.
Yeah.
That's very different.
But let's just say, wireless communications in general, just the ambient radiation that's in this room right now from the Wi-Fi and the nearby cell towers, which, by the way, I know where they are because I mapped them and purposefully didn't move into an apartment near them. But let's just say, okay, I'm getting that hermetic stress, and so the adaptation is happening right now in my genetic expression for this generation. I've always thought, well, it hasn't been around that long, so how many generations do we have to go through until that adaptation takes place, and then we're made better for it, or at least tolerant to it? But what you just described is like a very quick adaptation, which is really interesting.
Well, that's the epigenetics. To change genetics, that's going to take generations. But the epigenetics is the gene expressions. Those are what change in the short term. But I mean, you think about it. You know how much EMF is in this room altogether right now? I mean, how many football games are being played right now that are flowing through this room? How many songs are being played that are flowing through this room? How many conversations are taking place on the cell phones everywhere around us that are passing through this room? I mean, you take a look, this room would be packed solid with EMF.
Yeah.
If you looked at the full spectrum of it.
Yeah. I had a group of photos that I had at some point. I posted them on Instagram, and I don't know how they generated this, but they were essentially showing different rooms inside a building, and they made a visual representation of all the RF in there, and it's just like these rainbowing, cascading tunnels and plumes just filling every square inch of the space, and it was a really good visual representation of what you just described. Now, I took that as like, holy shit, I'm never leaving the forest again, you know what I mean? But I think that's the thing a lot of people don't understand about EMF is because it's invisible. It's like, I don't know, I feel fine, and I thought, living in that apartment I lived, at first I felt great, and then over time it was like, what's happening here? Now, if we could see some sort of thermal imaging of that space, it would have been, like living next to a freaking X-ray machine or something, hence when I found out I moved like hell and even ended up creating an EMF course because I was like, man, this could happen to other people. And because you only feel the symptoms of it typically, unless you know the source of it, you can get jacked up. But I like where you're going with that, of just the epigenetic effect of the hermetic stress from just the general low-level ambient EMF. That's actually reassuring because I now have this sort of nocebo thing where I see a router across the room and I have this nervous system response. It's like, I'm in danger, which is of course making it worse because now I'm in fear and anxiety around the thing instead of it just being there in the background. It's kind of a double jeopardy.
Oh, I should have brought you to my apartment downtown when I lived there because you would pull up the Wi-Fi and there'd be 42.
I know. That's why I don't live in the city, man. That's why I don't live in the city. In the house that we're renovating right now, actually, my buddy Brian Hoyer has been on the show a couple times. He's a building biologist, and finally, because it's the first time owning, I had him and his team come out and and screen the whole place, and I made the bedroom a Faraday cube. It is like the forest, and then 2 other additional bedrooms. And then I did something interesting in there too, which totally negates your theory of the epigenetic effect. But in a room where, like our TV room and the sitting room and in my and my fiance's offices, we just did low frequency pain and grounded it all. So we grounded the floor, grounded like, a U shape around where the desk or the sofa would be, not to block the RF, but just so you're not getting hit with that AC current the whole time you're sitting there trying to relax. So I'm really excited. It's like the house is so dialed in.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Any mitigation you can do, especially when you've had health issues or you do have a kind of a story around it. It's just like we were talking with the stories around the plant medicine stuff. It truly does impact the physiology. in waves. And so, like, for me, I look at it and I'm like, okay, none of this stuff bothers me. You know, I moved from living on a 54-acre mountain home in North Carolina with no Wi-Fi to that downtown Austin apartment where I had 42 signals coming in at the same time, and I didn't notice anything.
You didn't feel any different?
No, felt nothing.
Wow.
But I wasn't like, oh, am I feeling something? And
Yeah.
Because if you get into that mindset, you start, oh, okay, that's symptom, that's probably that. And so you can get yourself into that mode. I'm not saying that there isn't health issues that can occur. It's just, you know, don't create health issues and attribute it to that without, you know, really paying attention to what it's coming from.
Yeah, I think that's sage advice. There is and it goes for stuff we eat too, right?
Right.
It's like, if you become orthorexic because you're so paranoid about eating animal products or, you know, whatever it is, like people go on these extreme carnivore diet, vegan diet, paleo diet, and then become so rigid and kind of controlling about it, and I know because I've done this, that then that's like its own sort of mental pathology disguising itself as like your desire to keep yourself healthy and love your body and take care of yourself. You know, there's this sort of razor's edge there of just having an awareness and trying to make wise decisions to support yourself, but also realizing there's only so much you can control, and the effort to control everything in your environment and become some biohacking nut, I know from experience, is probably worse than just living your life.
Right.
You know, so one night I have some sourdough bread, and it's delicious. I love bread, you know what I mean? I love cheese. Pizza, what better food is there? And I'll find myself eating it and going, oh, you're probably going to be hurting tomorrow. And it's like, no, delete. I'm going to actually enjoy this, and I'm going to, you know, see this as the most nourishing, healthy, supportive, biocompatible food that I could be eating right now, and it makes life a much more enjoyable.
I do that with full gluten pizza.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, you know, because it's like, hey, I know I'm not going to be perfect. I'm not that disciplined, and I don't really want to be. So it's kind of finding that balance. Now, am I going to go out and go to the grocery store and buy a bunch of bread and stock the house with it? No, but if I go out with friends, I don't want to be that one guy that's like, I don't eat this, I don't eat that, no this, no that. It's just relax.
See, I use the cockroach theory.
What's that?
The cockroach can survive anything because they just do whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think as long as you have some of those like pizzas and those things periodically in your diet, then you have that protection to eat that stuff without getting a massive reaction to it.
Yeah.
So the intermittent exposure is hormetic.
Right. Right. I love it. Well, I think we covered everything I wanted to cover, Dan. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you for your generosity of time and spirit. Man, I think if anyone's wanting to know how to not only optimize their executive function, but just so many different things we covered, it's really valuable information. Thank you for doing the work that you do.
Thank you.
Your commitment to research, and also the commitment to your patients that's helping you further refine all of your knowledge. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. One thing I got to ask you before we go. Who are 3 teachers or teachings that have influenced you and your work that you might share with us?
Plato, Nietzsche, and Teilhard de Chardin.
Man, I'm going deep.
Yeah.
Usually people are like, oh, my granddad. I'm like, wow, okay, cool. Well, we're going to put those in the show notes for those that are unfamiliar. I know the first 2, the last one I've never heard of.
Oh, you're going to like him.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Say it again.
Teilhard de Chardin.
What's the basis of his teaching?
He was the early 1900s, 1920s, 1930s. He was a Jesuit priest that got into really looking at how we live and the fact that we don't need more happiness or more bliss. We need more well-being, and that's the philosophy of Nietzsche as well as Plato. Is that we're in this pursuit of happiness, and it's the wrong pursuit. It's well-being that we really want. And it was really interesting to go through Desjardins' journey. I mean, the Jesuits didn't like him because he was talking crazy stuff about a noosphere of consciousness, of this unity consciousness that was out there, and that we were heading towards greater and greater complexity in life so that we could understand more and more, gather more and more information until the point where we get to the point where the collective consciousness kind of triggers and we all are able to share the knowledge together.
Like a 100-monkey kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Wow, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And then where can we find your website, social media, anything like that you want to share?
The website that covers all of our ecosystem is Apeiron, APEIRONZOH, apeironzoy.com. That's Greek for limitless life.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay,
and,
cool.
And we are at Apeironzoy on Instagram.
All right, sweet. And then I wish I would have known that when I was tagging you earlier, because I didn't find your name. I tagged Neurohacker. And then for the Qualia, people listening, you can get that at neurohacker.com. And I think I have a discount code or something. I'll announce it in the intro or outro. But thank you so much for coming by today, man. Appreciate it.
It was fun.
And I'm happy that I share the home of Austin with you,
That's
too.
right.
Yeah, I look forward to spending more time with you.
For sure.